you're hoping that you're the guy that gets to go in. From the time that you take the job, you're hoping something will happen. You can contribute, and in a major way. That's the dream. It's like being a football quarterback. You don't want to sit on the bench. You're waiting to go in. You want your number to be called.
At home for the Giants, downtown San Francisco in the background, and we zoom into Candlestick Park.
We were getting ready for dinner, and the World Series was coming on. So that was the focus of the day, was hopefully we don't get a fire in the middle of the World Series. Little did we know.
Timeout, Michaels. Welcome to Game 3. It's a dominant open pitching, of course. I don't know if we're on the air. Yeah. I guess you are hearing us, even though we have no picture. You're looking at a fire, obviously, in the city of San Francisco.
By the time we got to the top of Fillmore Street, a fire, it was already to a 4th alarm. Their 41 engine had hooked up to hydrants. They had no water.
The water lines have ruptured. There is no water coming out of the fire hydrant.
There was so many broken water mains, the water was just running down the streets. Eventually, they called into Phoenix.
The San Francisco fireboat Phoenix has been drafting water out of the bay. They ship it to the pumper, and from there, it goes to the fire.
When they finally got it hooked up, it lit up all the lines. What turned into the 5th alarm, which was directly across the street, that building was fully involved. It looked like somebody dropped a bomb on the building.
Shut off the gas! Shut off electricity!
They had these meters, and they could tell how much gas was collecting in the buildings, and when it got to a certain level, it means that it'll explode just on a spark. And in fact, the building that was the 5th alarm did explode.
We're looking at 3-story buildings that are now 1-story. Hello?
Right here.
2 people came over to me and said that they thought that they had heard a voice from underneath the building. It was a 4-story building that was laying flat. It was reduced to 1 story. There was a window below the fire escape. I was able to put my head in and yell, "Is anybody in there?" And I heard back, "Yeah, I hear you. I'm in here." I went back and reported in to Captain Nolan, and I wanted to know what he wanted to do, and he looked over, and his assessment was, "I'm not going to order anybody into that building." I just said I'd like to give it a shot. And he said, "All right, it's your call." I told them I needed a chainsaw, and they went and got a chainsaw, and I started cutting the floor joists. PG&E kept saying, if this thing takes off, it's going to blow. Even starting that saw could send this thing up. When I almost got to it, the building across the street collapsed, and the debris that was on fire came all the way across the street and actually ignited the building next door to us. Now this building's on fire and we're underneath it. When I got to the main beam, it had come down and crushed her hip and pelvis and had her pinned. There was no way with that saw. The blade was almost flat. I could have cut that timber. I said, I've got to go get another chainsaw, and I'll be right back. And she didn't think that was a good idea. And I handed her my flashlight under the beam, and she didn't let go of my hand. And I said, I'll be right back, and we'll be having a cup of coffee, talking about this in a half hour or whatever. And she, as anybody would, was a little apprehensive, and I just said, I'll promise you I'll be back. And with that, she let go. And they had to go to the truck to get the chainsaw, and that's when, you know, your mind kicks in, and I started thinking about my kids and, you know, who would tell them if something happened, and so I just tried to blank my mind, take a few breaths, and wait. This beam was big enough, I wasn't even sure we could get through with the chainsaw, but I was cutting it. I just said, trust me, or I know what I'm doing. I wasn't just trying to think of a way to explain to her that I wasn't going to cut her in half. And I said I'd been a woodsman, which I don't know what that has to do with her being under the door, but she stayed calm.
Were you a woodsman?
No. Right before we got the door off her, the water started coming down on us. And the sheriff said, you got to shut that water off. You're going to drown me before you get me out of here. It was up to about her neck. I handed her my turnout coat. She put over her face. And I said to Sheriff, you know, we're running out of time here. We got to go. And she just said, go for it. We rolled her back onto the backboard, on her back. We crawled out through the tunnel that we'd cut.
Nice job, guys. Nice job.
They got me on the gurney to put me in the ambulance. I said, I'm not going in the ambulance until I talk to Jerry. I have to have his last name. And they said, well, he's already gone over somewhere. I said, well, I'm not going anywhere till you find him.
And the paramedic came back and said, yeah, you got to go over there because she's not going to go in the ambulance until she gets your last name. So I walked over and said, you know, told her my last name, and she pulled me down and hugged me and said, you're my hero. And they loaded her in and closed the doors, and away they went. As soon as the ambulance was out of sight, Pete and the other officer said, okay, you know, you patted yourself on the back long enough, let's get back to work. And the guy that was on the roof, who was the captain of 14, he came down and said, geez, if I knew that was you under there, I wouldn't have wasted the water, which is firehouse humor for, you know, we were in a tough situation and it's over. I phoned my wife as soon as the earthquake hit and checked, and she said, we're okay, be careful. I think she called me in the morning and she was not very happy. I guess it was the New York Times writer had written an article, and it was in the front page of the paper, and she wasn't real pleased.
What'd she say?
She said, well, everybody thinks this is a big deal except your wife who's sitting at home wondering if you're going to come home.